into the home where love was a trap, and survival became my first language. I grew up in a house that felt more like a lesson than a home, a place where the walls were cracked by fists, and the air carried the weight of broken promises. The truth is simple. My father never stayed, but he never left. Not really. He abandoned us whenever it pleased him, vanishing for days, weeks, sometimes months, and walked back through our door like a king returning to a kingdom he wrecked. He knew my mother would always accept him, no matter how many nights she cried herself empty. He knew her heart was a soft place he could land after every storm he created, and he used that softness like a weapon. He would come in with sweet words, the kind that melt your guard if you didn't know better. A gentle voice, a forced smile, a promise to change. But with him, sweetness was just the quiet before chaos, the sugar before the poison. My mother, God bless her soul, believed him every time. Maybe because she was loyal. Maybe because she was afraid. Maybe because she still saw the man he pretended to be in public. People called her the most beautiful woman in the family. A beauty that made strangers pause. A beauty that made relatives brag. But in our home, that beauty was always bruised. I watched him beat her even when she carried my younger brother in her belly. As if her pregnancy was an insult to him. As if love growing inside her body made him smaller. I remember standing in the corner, trembling, asking myself the same question again and again. How does a beautiful woman marry a man who treats her like an enemy? How does she stay loyal to a man who is dangerous even when he claims to love her? He wouldn't choose her. He wouldn't leave her. He just kept her trapped. A prisoner in a marriage built on fear. Me. I learned who my father was long before I learned who I was. He only smiled when he wanted money. He only spoke softly when he needed something. He only looked at me when he wanted to remind me that I was nothing in his eyes. He hated me for the same reason I hated him. Because I stood between him and the woman he broke. Because I saw through his lies even as a child. Because I comforted the mother he wounded. And that hatred grew like a fire in both of us. It was in that house, that broken, chaotic, dangerous house, that I learned one of the hardest truths of my life. Love is a blade that cuts deepest when held by the wrong hands. The seeds of anger between us were planted early, but it wouldn't be long before those seeds became the roots of the person I would become. A girl carved from pain, shaped by fear, and destined to survive what should have destroyed her. My father hated me. Not the way a man dislikes a stranger, but the way a man despises a mirror that reflects his own cruelty. Every time I comforted my mother, every time I tried to shield her from his fists or his venomous words, I became the target of his wrath. I was too much, too bold, too sharp, too alive for him to tolerate. By the time I was 12, I had learned how to survive in the house without becoming its victim entirely. I learned to duck, to speak softly when necessary, to fight only when it mattered. I grew into a tomboy, rough-edged and fearless, my eyes sharper than knives, my hands ready to defend what little was mine. But he made sure I knew my place. He denied me school, telling me I was too worthless to learn, too ugly to shine, too broken to dream. Each discouraging word he spat felt like a brick on my chest. You will amount to nothing, girl. Nothing but shame for this family. I carried those words with me like chains, but they also ignited something fierce inside me. For every door he closed, every promise he broke, I built a ladder in my mind to climb higher. For every time he raised his hand or his voice, I swore I would never be small again. By 16 I had had enough. I packed what little I owned, tucked away my pain, and walked out the door that had held my childhood hostage. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the faces that had trapped me in despair. That night, under the cold gaze of the city lights, I made a vow. I would rise, if only to shame the man who made me feel small. From that moment, I was no longer just a daughter of a violent father or a sorrowful mother. I was a girl on fire, a girl who would survive the streets, the world, and anything, or anyone, that tried to cage her spirit. The house behind me remained in ashes, but those ashes were mine. And from them I would build something they could never touch. My freedom, my power, my life. In the streets, innocence is a mask, and survival is a lesson only the ruthless can teach. The streets became my school. The night became my teacher. Every corner, every alley, every flicker of light was a test of wit, timing, and courage. I ran errands for anyone who would pay. I hustled with small jobs, selling what little I could, carrying messages, moving goods through shadows no one dared to enter. I learned quickly that life does not reward the timid, and danger is never polite. You either see it coming or it sees you first. I became a student of people. Their eyes, their hesitation, their greed, and their fear. A man's glance could tell me what he carried in his pocket. A woman's smile could tell me whether she would betray me for $1. Timing was everything. Move too fast and you get caught. Move too slow and you get left behind, or worse. But most of all, I learned how to disappear in plain sight. To wear innocence like a cloak. To walk like a child and strike like a wolf. By 16, the girl who had left her father's house was no longer the scared daughter of violence. I was a creature of the streets, quiet, calculated, and untouchable. And yet, the world saw only what I wanted them to see. A small, unassuming girl who could be ignored, until it was too late. The streets teach you one truth. I whispered to myself on nights when the city's lights blurred into smoke. Appear weak and they will underestimate you. Appear harmless and you will survive. And survive I did. For the first time I tasted a freedom that was mine alone. A freedom earned in shadows and whispers, in risk and cunning, in nights that never promised dawn. They watch from the shadows, thinking they know her. But the girl with 3 lives answers to no one. My name is Leona Monroe, and by the time I turned 17, I had learned the rules of survival better than anyone around me. I secured a night job at the Velvet Eclipse, the city's most exclusive bar, where neon lights hid secrets and expensive spirits drowned regrets. By day I ran 2 other hustles, delivering rare goods through alleys only the brave dared enter, and tutoring neighborhood kids in exchange for cash or valuable information. Each life demanded a different me. At the bar I laughed with elegance, moved like I belonged to a world that had no place for girls like me. On the streets I was sharp-eyed, quick, untouchable, a shadow that vanished before danger ever touched me. In quiet moments, I was the girl who remembered every bruise, every humiliation, every lie my father had taught me to fear. Men approached, boys, with charm, with greed, with the expectation that I would bend. But I did not. I rejected them all. Men were trash in my eyes. I did not need their approval, their attention, or their touch. I answered only to myself. And the city noticed. The girl with 3 lives. Whispers followed me through alleys and barrooms. She's untouchable. She moves like she belongs to shadows. She disappears before anyone knows she was there. And somewhere, in places I could not see, eyes followed me. From glass towers and darkened windows they watched, calculating, studying, anticipating. Some were intrigued. Some were predators. All were wrong if they thought they understood her. Independence is a language few ever learn. And I had mastered it. By night's end, pockets full from my 3 worlds, I walked home alone. 3 lives. 1 girl. And the power of knowing that I answered to no one but myself. I was dangerous. And those who were watching were only beginning to realize it. If you've enjoyed following Leona's story so far and want to witness every twist, shadow, and secret of her life, please hit subscribe. She's being watched from every corner of the city, and you don't want to miss what comes next. In the shadows, power watches, and sometimes, it chooses its prey. For weeks he had been watching. Not openly, not with clumsy curiosity, but with the precision of a predator studying its prey. The man they whispered about in the underworld as Lucien DeMarco, a Mafia king whose influence stretched from the neon streets to the glass towers above, had taken notice of me. He noticed everything. My discipline. The way I balanced 3 lives without falter. The duality in me. The innocent girl who smiled at patrons, the wolf who ruled the night. The fire in my eyes that refused to be tamed. That night it happened. The bar was crowded, the music a low hum of lust and money. I moved with the practiced grace of someone who belonged to shadows. I didn't notice him at first, and perhaps that was the reason he chose that moment to step closer. Leona Monroe, he said, smooth and measured, his voice carrying the weight of command. I froze. Only for a second. He didn't linger in idle conversation. He studied me, his gaze sharp, calculating, reading me as if he had already walked through the streets of my life. From his coat pocket he produced a card. He slid it across the bar with deliberate care. "Call me when you're ready," he murmured before disappearing into the crowd as silently as he had arrived. I barely looked at it. A man like him should not be trusted. A man like him had eyes everywhere. A man like him was dangerous. And yet I dropped it. Without thought. Without hesitation. It hit the floor with a faint clink, unnoticed by anyone but one person. A rival's eyes. Hidden in the shadows. Watching everything. Recording everything. They would remember this. They would act. I walked away, unaware of the ripples my small act had already caused. In the darkness I remained Leona Monroe. Innocent to the world, fierce in the shadows, and unknowingly in the crosshairs of forces far larger than the streets I had learned to command. Some mornings begin like any other, until the shadows come for you. Dawn had barely broken when it arrived. The city was quiet, the streets still wet from the night's rain, but danger had already found me. Men in black stepped into the Velvet Eclipse, their presence impossible to ignore. They didn't speak at first, just handed me a tablet showing images, proof of someone watching me, and then wordlessly they motioned for me to follow. I hesitated, only for a second. Fear gripped my chest like a fist, but I knew resistance wasn't an option. A blindfold was placed over my eyes. The world became darkness, movement, and the soft rumble of the engine. I could hear the city slipping past, alive and indifferent, while I sat in silence, trapped, trying to imagine where they were taking me. When the van finally stopped, I was guided down a corridor I couldn't see. The blindfold came off and I found myself in the presence of a man whose name alone carried terror. Victor Crane, a notorious rival mafia lord whose empire of fear rivaled even DeMarco's. He didn't waste time. No pleasantries. No questions. Only a proposition. I have a task for you, Victor said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. You will kill the man who gave you this card. He gestured toward the card now resting on a polished table between us. I swallowed. Refusal was not an option. They would kill me before breakfast. I knew it. And what do I get if I succeed? I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. A large payment, he said almost casually, as if my life and the job were mere numbers on a ledger. I narrowed my eyes. And if I fail? He smiled. Not cruelly, not angrily, but in a way that made the air around me chill. A slow, deliberate smile that promised consequences beyond imagination. You will not wish to fail, he murmured. I felt it, the weight of the choice or perhaps the lack of one. I was no longer just Leona Monroe, girl of 3 lives. I was now a piece in a game far larger than I had ever imagined. And the shadows that had been watching me all along? They had only just begun to move. Some betrayals are invisible, until they burn from within. The van had been silent for miles. The city disappeared behind concrete walls, neon fading into shadows, until I found myself somewhere that smelled of metal, antiseptic, and fear. They guided me inside. The white light hit my eyes and the world wavered. Doctors with masked faces surrounded me. Faces impossible to read, voices muffled and distant. I felt the cold bite of a needle. Then darkness swallowed me. When I woke, the room had changed. Cameras blinked from every corner, their lenses sharp, unblinking, judging. I could feel something alien beneath my skin. A tracking device. And worse, hidden deeper, a bomb designed to kill if I misstepped. I examined the room carefully. Antidotes lay within reach, small vials that promised control, a fleeting lifeline. I pretended weakness, pretending to stumble, to sway, to be fragile. The doctors leaned in, masks hiding their faces, hands ready to steady me. And in that moment, my hands moved quietly, deliberately. For antidotes disappeared into my pocket. Silent as a whisper. Quick as a shadow. I let them think they had me. I let them believe I was just a girl, scared and helpless. But I was not helpless. I was Leona Monroe. And even in a room full of invisible threats, I still moved like a wolf, unseen, untouchable, and ready. The game had changed. And for the first time I had a secret advantage. If you're on the edge of your seat as Leona navigates unseen betrayal, subscribe now. Every shadow watches, every move counts, and the story is only getting darker. Some contracts are signed not with ink, but with fear, obedience, and survival. I was led into a room colder than the city streets at dawn. The air smelled of leather and power. And there he was, Victor Crane, the rival Mafia lord who had pulled me from the streets and into a game I did not choose. He didn't speak more than necessary. Instructions were precise, sharp, and dangerous. The target, the method, the timing. A payment was offered, large enough to make the risk almost seem worth it. And then he handed me a small vial, the same antidote I had stolen at the lab. My instincts screamed that something was wrong. Every detail, every shadow in the room, every twitch of his hand, told me the danger was far from over. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask questions, to understand the why, the how, the truth. But he did not allow it. No words passed my lips. No curiosity could escape. He was the storm, and I was merely the girl he had chosen to test. I did what I had learned to do best. I moved quietly with precision. While he focused on the logistics, I quietly set up my bank account. Every asset, every cent, every resource I had gained, secured. I made sure my mother could inherit it all should fate take me. Because no matter what he demanded, no matter what the streets had taught me, family remained untouchable. I left the room with the sense that every step I took from that moment would be measured, watched, and counted. But I had learned long ago that survival often requires silence, cunning, and the foresight to protect what cannot fight for itself. And so I did. I followed his instructions, accepted the payment, and carried the antidote in my pocket. A lifeline in a world designed to make me fail. Yet deep down I knew one truth. Nothing in this life is given freely, and every gift comes with a shadow. Some connections are built in silence, and some in danger. The card had sat on the floor for hours, ignored, forgotten. Yet curiosity, or fate, pulled me to call the number etched in gold letters. Lucien DeMarco. He answered without hesitation. No pleasantries, no wasted words. And then unexpectedly an invitation. A private table at Aurelia, the city's elite restaurant, reserved for those who could pay, or those he wanted to watch. I arrived and found him waiting, the low candlelight dancing on his sharp features. We spoke little. Not because conversation was impossible, but because both of us were studying, measuring, weighing. His eyes, dark and precise, searched for cracks. I returned the gaze, masking every flicker of fear, every tremor of unease. He sensed something was off. A tracker perhaps, though he could not be certain. What he didn't know, what I had yet to discover, was far worse. A bomb under my skin, a silent threat that had already decided part of my path. I felt sick, tense, every nerve alive with alarm, every breath heavy with calculation. When dinner ended, he insisted on dropping me home. But the drive was unbearable. My stomach twisted, my thoughts raced. I needed protection, safety, a roof not controlled by strangers or enemies. So I acted. A subtle slip, a faltering step, a whispered plea. Enough to make him pause, to make him see the urgency I could not explain. Finally he relented. Not with anger, not with hesitation, but with a quiet understanding. "You stay here," he said simply, as though the walls themselves could keep you alive. And so I did. For the first time I slept somewhere that was mine yet not mine. Protected yet observed. Safe yet trapped in the quiet tension between us. A dangerous connection neither of us fully understood. Even in silence, power and fear had found each other. And in that room I realized, the game had grown more complicated and I was in its center. Destiny does not knock softly, it breaks the door and calls your name. Morning came wrapped in golden light that spilled across marble floors and expensive silence. I woke in Lucien DeMarco's luxury suite. The kind of place built for kings, the kind of place girls like me only see through windows or dreams. He stood by the window adjusting his cufflinks, looking like every problem in the world bowed before him. His voice was low, steady, the type that commanded attention without raising a tone. "Liana," he said, turning toward me, "I didn't give you that card for nothing. I want you in my organization." Just like that. No build-up. No negotiation. A destiny thrown at my feet. My heart trembled, but I didn't show it. Because the truth was cruel and invisible. The enemy Mafia was listening through the device in my body. Every word I spoke, every breath I took, echoed into dangerous ears. So I agreed. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. Lucien didn't question my quick answer. He studied me as if he sensed the fear behind my calm. Yet he let me speak no further. He was a man of commands, not conversation. Soon we were on the road to his mansion. A fortress of power, guarded by men whose eyes never blinked. Stepping inside felt like entering another world. A world where shadows had names and loyalty had a price. He assigned me my missions. Observation. Social manipulation. Reconnaissance. The kind of tasks meant for someone who knew how to move unnoticed. Someone who lived in 3 lives and survived all of them. I carried them out with precision. I became a ghost in rooms full of danger. A listener in places where one wrong word could turn into death. A girl whose innocence masked a growing storm. But as the days passed, something else happened. I saw him less and less. Lucien DeMarco, the man who had pulled me into his world, the man who sensed danger in me before I sensed it myself, began to vanish behind meetings, secrets, and miles of distance. And the more he disappeared, the more I realized I was now alone. In a game I never asked to play. If you're following Liana's journey through fear, power, and destiny, tap subscribe, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Time poisons the mind and fear bends the heart, but desire can twist both. The days were relentless, each one heavier than the last. The antidotes I had stolen ran dangerously low, every dose a fragile promise that my body might survive another hour. The rival Mafia's threats grew bolder, blackmail whispering in every shadow, reminding me that one misstep could end everything. Kill him, they demanded. Or die. But I could not. Not him. Not anyone. Pressure mounted, gnawing at my resolve. I needed answers. I needed direction. And above all, I needed Lucien DeMarco. Yet the doors to him were sealed. No appointment meant no access. Security officers and assistants dismissed me, their eyes unreadable, their voices polite but firm. I could feel desperation creeping in, but I had learned long ago that desperation was also power, if wielded carefully. So I created a scene. A stumble, a whispered plea, a glance heavy with something they could not name. I moved closer, my energy shifting from fear to subtle seduction. Every gesture, every tilt of my head, every flicker in my eyes, was calculated. And then he appeared. Lucien DeMarco. Watching, assessing, and finally smiling in that way that made shadows dance in his eyes. He did not speak at first. We simply studied one another, the tension almost tangible. For a brief, suspended moment, the room existed only for us. I leaned in under the pretense of whispering, feeling the warmth of his presence, the subtle brush of his arm. His breath was steady, his eyes locked on mine. I could sense his curiosity, his patience, his hidden desire, an intensity that mirrored my own inner conflict. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the tracker into his wine. My fingers brushed the glass lightly, casual, imperceptible. He did not see. He could not. And then our hands met. A spark, a connection neither of us fully understood, passed between us. I felt the weight of my life, my choices, and the poison ticking in my veins. Yet in that suspended heartbeat, the world narrowed down to one truth. I had to survive. Fear, manipulation, inner conflict, they all waited outside the door. But in that moment, romance, tension, and danger intertwined, and I held the upper hand. The tracker in his wine was a silent promise. I was no one's pawn. Not even the man whose eyes could see right through me. Truth has eyes, and lies are only shadows waiting to be unmasked. The quiet in Lucien DeMarco's penthouse was a trap. Too calm, too measured. The kind of silence that carried the weight of danger. His tech team had already detected it, the tracker in his wine. Every signal, every ping had led straight to me. I didn't run. I didn't resist. They brought me to him. The moment I saw him, his presence filled the room like a storm. No words were wasted. No mercy given. His hand shot out, gripping my neck with a strength that could crush bones. His eyes, dark and unyielding, bore into mine. "Who sent you?" he demanded, voice low, deadly. "Why?" I stayed silent. My lips sealed, my heart hammering, my mind racing through every escape, every street lesson, every trick that had kept me alive this long. He released me only long enough to throw me into the cell. The metal door slammed behind me, echoing like a verdict. The cold bit at my skin, the shadows swallowed me, and the weight of near death pressed down. Alone, I pressed my palms to the wall. Every breath came sharp, every thought a calculated risk. I had survived streets, labs, blackmail, and poison. I would survive this too. But I knew one truth. Lucien DeMarco's patience was not infinite, and every secret had its price. Chapter 4. The cell was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scrape of metal against stone. Days felt like years, and I had begun to count every breath, every shadow, every heartbeat. Then quietly, a tray appeared at my cell door. Simple food, bread, fruit, water, but enough to make the cold and hunger less unbearable. I looked up to see a man, a guard, standing just outside the bars. I narrowed my eyes, testing him. "Who sent you?" I asked, my voice sharp, wary, like a blade poised for betrayal. He hesitated, then whispered, "No one. I only wanted to help." I studied him, weighing every word, every flicker of expression. And then, quietly, I signaled the camera above with a subtle gesture. He risks his life for me. Somewhere above, in the hidden heights of the mansion, I knew Lucien DeMarco was watching. And for the first time in weeks, I sensed something shift in the stormy fortress of his heart. Not anger, not suspicion, but something far more dangerous. Curiosity and a spark of empathy. Even a man built from power and fear could feel the pull of small kindnesses. And in that moment, in the shadowed cell, the smallest act had started to unbalance a king. I ate the bread quietly, savoring not just the food, but the knowledge that not all darkness was absolute. Some light, however faint, could pierce the coldest stone. And in that subtle shift, I began to realize, even in a world of shadows, hearts can stir, and I was beginning to awaken his. My body was shutting down. Each breath felt like dragging glass into my lungs. The lab poison, the internal bomb, the stress. Everything inside me was collapsing. And the antidotes I stole? Gone. Every single one. I pressed my back to the cold wall of the cell, fighting the shivers crawling under my skin. The guard, the same man who brought bread, noticed the way my hands trembled. His brows knit with concern. "What's wrong?" he whispered. I shook my head. "Leave. If they see you talking to me again, you're dead." But he stepped closer, stubborn and gentle in the same breath. "No. Tell me what you need." I hesitated, then the truth spilled out like a wound. "There's an antidote. Without it I..." Before I could finish, he nodded as if he had already made his decision. "I'll get it," he said, his voice trembling but determined. I knew what that meant. He would risk everything for me. And that terrified me more than the poison. Minutes later. Chaos. Lucien's men stormed the hallway. Alarms blared. Voices shouted. Boots pounded. They seized the guard, dragging him away like an animal. I screamed his name, gripping the bars until my fingers bled. He was beaten mercilessly, each blow echoing inside my bones. Then they came for me. Cold hands grabbed my arms. My feet scraped against the floor as they dragged me into a chamber reeking of rot. Bones, old blood, the ghosts of 100 endings. I fell to my knees, sobbing into my hands. The room felt like the last page of my life. I cried for my mother, for my little brother, for the childhood I never escaped. And I cried for the guard, the only man who had shown mercy in a world that fed on cruelty. Then I saw him. Kneeling. Bound. Bruised. Barely conscious. I struggled forward, choking on fear. "He's innocent," I screamed. Please, hurt me, not him. He only brought me food. Please. My voice cracked on every word, collapsing under the weight of a lifetime of silent suffering. A gun was raised at the guard. I didn't think. I just moved. I threw myself in front of him, arms out, heart pounding like a trapped animal. The shot fired. My world exploded. I felt something slam into my chest. But not the burning of a bullet. Something colder, sharper, chemical. An antidote. Delivered through a needle disguised as a gunshot. Before I could gasp, a second shot struck my ribs. The tracker inside me went dead. I felt the electrical pulse snap like a string. The darkness. A full collapse of body and breath. I fainted, sinking into a sea of nothingness. But as the world faded, I felt hands. Real hands. Lifting me. Supporting me. Rushing me to hidden doctors. All under Lucien DeMarco's orders. Up in his private room behind darkened glass, he watched every second. And something inside him, something buried deep beneath the armor of a king, shifted. Not pity. Not guilt. Something more dangerous. More human. More fatal. A feeling no Mafia lord should ever have for a girl marked for death. And that was the moment, the very moment, my story changed forever. I floated for days in a world of darkness. No pain. No sound. Only the cold echo of my own heartbeat trying to remember why it still existed. The doctors worked in silence. Lucien's hidden surgeons, the kind who stitched life together the way others stitch secrets. They removed every implant, every tracker, every device hidden under my skin. Every foreign piece of death lodged inside me was cut out with perfect precision. When they were done, there was nothing left of the rival Mafia's control. No bomb. No poison. No chain. To the rival Mafia, I was officially dead. A ghost. A problem erased. But I didn't know that yet. I only knew the darkness, and then light forced its way back. My eyes fluttered open. White ceiling. Soft sheets. Monitors humming like distant lullabies. Fear clawed its way up my throat. Am I dead? My voice cracked like a forgotten hope. A nurse stepped forward, whispering, "You're safe. You survived." But my hands trembled violently. My memories blurred into terror. The chamber, the bones, the gunshot, the darkness swallowing me whole. And then I felt him before I saw him. A presence too heavy to be ignored. Too silent to be harmless. Lucien DeMarco entered the room. No guards. No weapons drawn. Just him. Watching me with an expression I couldn't name. He stood by the door waiting, not out of patience but to see if I would reach for a weapon. If I would try to kill him. If I was still a threat. But the moment our eyes met, the dam cracked. Tears flooded down my cheeks, unstoppable. My voice broke with a lifetime of secrets spilling out at once. "I couldn't kill you," I whispered. "I never could. They forced me. They poisoned me. They threatened my mother. They..." The words collapsed under sobs. Raw. Ugly. Real. I told him everything. Every lie. Every threat. Every piece of the plan they carved into my skin. Every fear that kept me breathing and dying at the same time. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rage. He didn't accuse. He simply watched. A silent storm in a tailored suit. When my voice finally broke to silence, he turned away. His hand lingered on the doorframe for a heartbeat, as if something inside him faltered. Then he left. Quietly. Slowly. Stunned. By the truth. And by the girl who had survived death twice. Yet still cried like she was fighting her first battle. And in that stillness I realized. My resurrection was not just of the body, but of the heart. The world felt different when they released me. Brighter, heavier. Too loud for a heart that had fought death in the dark. 2 men escorted me back to my apartment, both silent, both watching the hallways like wolves trained for ghosts. My legs trembled when I stepped inside, expecting emptiness, loss, or worse. But then, a voice, weak but alive. "Liana." I turned and there he was, the guard who risked everything for me. Alive. Bandaged. Bruised. But breathing. I didn't think. I didn't wait. I ran to him the way a child runs toward the last warm thing in winter. I threw my arms around him, shaking, relief crashing into me so hard it nearly dropped me to the floor. "You're alive," I whispered into his shoulder, tears burning hot and grateful. "I thought they killed you." "I thought." He winced but smiled. "They told me you were dead too." For a moment neither of us spoke. 2 survivors standing inside a small apartment that suddenly felt too sacred for lies. I pulled back, wiping my face. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't risk." He shook his head before I could finish. "I risked it once. I'd do it again." Something in my chest softened, dangerously. But before emotion could ripple deeper, a sharp ding from my phone cut the air. One message. No name. No signature. Just 2 words. Come. Penthouse. My breath caught. No one, and I meant no one, had ever been allowed inside Lucien DeMarco's penthouse. Not lovers. Not allies. Not even his highest-ranking captains. You're going, the guard asked. I nodded slowly. I don't think I have a choice. But in truth, my heart moved before my mind could argue. Curiosity, fear, and something unspoken tugged me toward the man who had watched my death and willed me back to life. I stepped toward the door. The guard called after me softly. Be careful, Liana. Men like him don't summon women without a reason. I paused, looked back at him, and whispered, I know. Then I left, toward the penthouse where power lived, and where my fate waited with folded arms and unreadable eyes. If this chapter pulled you in, tap like, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from so I can greet you properly in the next chapter. The penthouse door opened without a sound. Lucien DeMarco stood by the window, the city lights behind him turning his silhouette into something carved from shadow and heat. When he turned to me, his gaze softened, not the cold, calculating stare of a Mafia king, but the quiet concern of a man who had watched a woman die and fight her way back. Sit, he said, voice low, almost careful. Not a command. A request. I sat on the velvet couch, my hands trembling slightly. He walked toward me with the slow, measured steps of a man approaching something fragile, something precious. Tell me, he said, and for the first time he listened. Not as a boss, not as a man of power, but as a man trying to understand the storm inside the woman before him. I told him everything. Not the facts this time, but the feelings. The fear of dying. The confusion of surviving. The guilt. The exhaustion. The loneliness carved into my bones since childhood. When my voice cracked, he sat beside me. Close. Too close. His presence wrapped around me like warmth on a freezing night. You're safe, he whispered. Words I had never truly heard from anyone. I looked up. Our eyes collided, fire against ice. Something inside him broke first. He leaned forward, slowly, gently, as if giving me time to turn him away. His lips were a breath away from mine, and I turned my face. His breath stalled. His eyes flickered with surprise and restraint. Liana, he murmured, unsure for the first time. But before he could step back, I hooked 2 fingers into his collar, pulled him toward me, and kissed him with all the heat I had buried for too long. The world fell away. His hands found my waist, steady, reverent. My fingers slid into his shirt, feeling the warmth of him, the strength, the quiet hunger he had caged for too long. We didn't rush. We didn't tear. We simply melted. 2 broken histories finding rhythm in silence. Clothes didn't fall in chaos. They slipped away like secrets being gently undone. We moved from the couch to the bedroom not in haste, but in surrender. A path lit by breathless pauses and trembling closeness. And then, when he realized the truth, when he felt my breath hitch with a different kind of fear, he stopped. Completely. His forehead pressed to mine, his voice barely a whisper. Tell me if you want this, or I will not touch you again. I nodded, slow and certain. It's you, I breathed. I trust you. Something fierce and impossibly tender passed through his eyes. A storm quieting into devotion. He became gentler, softer, more patient than any man born from violence should be. And that night wasn't about bodies. It wasn't about lust. It wasn't about power. It was about healing. About a girl who had survived hell, and a man who ruled darkness, finding light in each other's arms. We fell asleep tangled together. His heartbeat beneath my ear. My palm resting against the chest of a man who was no longer just a Mafia lord, but something far more dangerous to my soul. A man I was beginning to feel. The drive to the mansion felt different. Not dangerous. Not tense. But warm. Steady. Like the kind of silence lovers share when their hearts are still speaking from the night before. Lucien kept glancing at me as if memorizing me anew. As if the revelation of my innocence had rewired something in him. The night before, when he discovered I was a virgin, his eyes had softened, darkened, and his entire touch changed. He held me like a treasure, loved me like a man who feared breaking something sacred. Even now, he couldn't hide the pride in his voice. You gave me something no one else ever touched, he said quietly. That means more than you know. My heart fluttered, painfully sweet. And then, the gates of the mansion opened. I frowned. This place, why are we here? Lucien only replied, because love protects what it cannot afford to lose. The car stopped, doors opened, and the cold morning air brushed my skin. Before I could ask anything else, the front door of the mansion swung open. Sis. My younger brother, Samuel, stood at the doorway, eyes huge, voice cracking, body trembling. I froze. The world stopped. Sam? He ran to me and I didn't walk. I sprinted into his arms. I grabbed him so tightly he gasped. I sobbed against his shoulder, shaking like a storm had finally passed. "You're alive," I cried. "You're safe, Sam, you're safe." Behind him, my mother appeared. Hands on her chest, eyes brimming. Then my father. A man who had never cried in his entire life. When he saw me, his knees buckled slightly. He covered his face with both hands, tears dropping like rain from a man who never allowed himself to feel. "My daughter." His voice broke. "I failed you. I failed all of you." I walked to him slowly, and when I embraced him, his entire body shook. "Dad," I whispered. "We survived. That's what matters." He held on to me like the world depended on it. Lucien stood quietly by the door watching us, a silent guardian. My mother grabbed my face between her palms. "I prayed every night," she whispered. "God kept you alive for a reason." I kissed her hands. "I came home, Mama." The dining room filled with warmth. The smell of seasoned chicken, fresh vegetables, and baked bread. Lucien had arranged everything, not as a mafia king, but as a man giving the woman he loved a piece of peace she never had. We sat around the table. My family, Lucien and me. Sam told jokes. My mother laughed without fear. My father stared at Lucien with gratitude instead of suspicion. Through it all, Lucien kept stealing glances at me. Soft, private, full of unspoken devotion. When the meal was almost done, my father cleared his throat and looked at Lucien. "You protected my family," he said. "I may not know who you truly are, but I know when a man loves with his life." Lucien placed his hand over mine beneath the table. "I do," he answered. My breath caught. Every piece of my heart trembled. Love, real love, had entered the room quietly, and now it was sitting between us, like a destiny we no longer needed to fear. The night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. Just before destiny takes its throne, Lucien stood in the dim glow of his private study, a silhouette carved from power and patience. I sat opposite him, wrapped in one of his shirts, my legs folded beneath me on the velvet couch, heart steady for the first time in years. He poured me wine with hands too gentle for a man who ruled shadows. But that was his secret. The world saw a king of crime. I saw the man who kissed my scars like scripture, and held me like life itself depended on my breathing. Then, a knock. Not loud. Not rushed. Just final. Lucien's eyes met mine. Dark, steady, promising everything. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. 2 guards entered, silent as ghosts. Between them, wrapped in a black cloth, laid the severed head of Victor, the man who implanted the bomb in my body, who owned my fear, who thought he owned my life. They placed it at my feet. The room didn't shake. The world didn't burst. But my soul finally inhaled. I didn't smile. Revenge wasn't sweet. Revenge wasn't fire. It was quiet. A door closing. A chain unlocking. A shadow finally stepping out of my lungs. I whispered, "Thank you." Lucien stepped behind me, hands sliding around my waist, lips brushing my neck as he whispered, "No one hurts what is mine." I turned, placing my palm on his cheek. "No," I corrected softly. "No one hurts who I am. And I am yours by choice, not fear." His mouth found mine. A kiss fierce enough to claim, gentle enough to heal. His arms wrapped around me, and I melted into him. 2 flames that refused to burn alone. That night we were not Mafia king and survivor. We were not wolf and lion. We were simply 2 souls, who had outrun death, fear, and destiny, only to collide into a love neither of us saw coming. I learned cruelty from my father, but love I learned from the man who saw the wolf in me, and crowned her a queen. If you enjoyed this powerful romantic love story, drop a like, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more breathtaking stories like this. Your support helps bring more fire, romance, and destiny to life.